Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I'm coming to you with all the books that I have hauled basically over the summer. So usually I show you guys the books that I have hauled each month, if I've hauled any. But somehow I ended up not doing that the whole summer, and I'm kind of regretting my choices now because I brought in a whole bunch more books, which was probably not totally wise because I was in the middle of moving. I didn't buy anything while I was moving until I got into the housing that we were going to be in over the entire summer. However, we are now in the process of moving into our permanent home, and it does mean that I need to carry all those books out with me. And I don't know how many I'm going to do. So in terms of the No Books, No Shelves, No Problems series that I'm doing, this version of it is probably going to be too many books, still no shelves. I'm starting to have some problems. Not in my opinion, but logistically it's becoming a little bit of a nightmare. Anyway, let's go through this because I have a lot of books to show you. This is probably just a third. So this may take a couple of videos. So I have quite a few classics here, and the first one that I found a copy of was Fathers and Son by Ivan Turgenev. This is a book that I have heard nothing but good things about. Seems like right up my alley, and it tells a story of a father who just has a wonderful relationship with his son, but then his son comes back after his first year at college, and things are different, and all the changes in his son's opinions and attitudes and behavior seem to be related to his new college friend that comes home with him. I've heard this has a lot of very interesting conversations and philosophical discussions and a lot of the things that I kind of expect from Russian literature. So I'm looking forward to this. I actually had it on my TBR, I think back in June, and it was a copy I borrowed from the library and I never got to it. So I kept seeing it at all the used bookstores I went to, and finally I found one at a really good price and I was like, let me just buy it. I did pick up a guide to James Joyce Ulysses over the summer. I just ordered this off of Amazon. I do plan at some point to attempt Ulysses, and this is one of the two guides that I heard a lot of people recommend. And I found when reading The Tale of Genji earlier this year that there's certain books that I really like using reader's guides with. So, this is one that I think I'm just going to need to help explain what's going on. So that's that. The next book I have here is East Lynne. This is by Ellen Wood, and this is a book that was a very surprise find for me at a used bookstore. Like, it is dog-eared by the previous owner and everything. And the reason I say it was a surprise find is it wasn't really a book that I was actively looking for, and this used bookstore in general just seemed like they had general fiction and not a lot of classics, so I was surprised to find a classic there. I believe this is a book that got added onto my TBR list because of the Best Books of 1899 list. I did pick up a book by Colleen McCullough, The First Man in Rome. This is historical fiction. She is the author of The Thornbirds, I believe, as well. But in general, I have heard a lot of really good things about her historical fiction, and this is one of the books that I have heard is the best of hers, and so I'm very curious. Ooh, there's maps. I also picked up Gerald Durrell's The Corfu Trilogy. And this is supposed to be about his stories about his childhood growing up with his family on a tropical island. And the first story was actually the story I heard about, and I didn't realize that it was a trilogy of stories, but I found it in this bind-up. The first story is called My Family and Other Animals, and what I have heard is that if you like all creatures great and small, that I want to say somebody said that they liked this set of books even better, and that unlike All Creatures Great and Small, the rest of the books in the series are just as good as the first one. So yeah, that really intrigued me, and I was happy to find a copy. Next, I have Caucasia. This is by Danzy, Senna, and I believe this is a book that takes place in the 70s and is involving a mixed-race family, and particularly follows two sisters, one who kind of relates and takes after the white mother more, and the other, the older sister, who takes after and follows sort of more the father's behavior and takes after more him. I don't know if it's in how they look or just how they act, but it's certainly during the 1970s in America where like the Black Power movement is coming into play and that kind of thing. And I believe it just explores their family dynamics, especially as the sisters relate to one another and as they feel divided over these issues, as the parents feel divided over these issues, and supposedly as the parents divide the sisters over these issues. So really fascinating story. Can't wait to get to it. Next up, I was super excited to find this book, The Dead Secret, which is a work by Wilkie Collins, who is an author whose works I am trying to read to zero. This is a book by Wilkie Collins that even in people who are mentioning a lot of his works, I've heard no one talk about, hopefully just because it's hard to find an edition of. Because sometimes that can be a bad thing. But anyway, I'm excited to add to my Wilkie Collins collection one more book. I have really enjoyed almost everything that I've read by him. I'm not sure that I've given any of his books less than a 4 at this point. There's definitely some that I like better, but I read a lesser talked of book of his recently and absolutely loved it. So I have high hopes for this one. I also picked up Alice Hoffman's The Dovekeepers. This is a book that has been on and off and on again in regards to my TBR. This is a much recommended historical fiction, and I'm not going to remember anything about what it's about, but like I said, I've had it on and off my TBR. I've taken it out from the library. I bought it, I sold it, I bought it back. Do you ever do that? And yeah, what finally convinced me that yes, I do actually need to read this book is, I think it was Melinda at A Web of Stories had read this book and really enjoyed it and then confirmed, yeah, Nicole, I think you would like this. Somebody said that anyway. I recently was exchanging a book at a little free library and saw they had a copy of The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. And this is another book, Pulitzer Prize winner, that I've gone back and forth again and keep hearing a little bit more and more about this book and think I would enjoy it, but I had gotten rid of my copy. And so when I saw it at a little free library and I was returning some books there, I was like, I returned multiple books and I was like, okay, if I'm gonna take one book, this would be it. Another book I picked up is Such a Long Journey by Rohinton Mistry, who is the author of A Fine Balance. I have read at least A Fine Balance twice. I really like Rohinton Mistry's writing, but Such a Fine Balance for me was just a little too depressing with not a lot else to get out of it, which was to some extent to the point. So I am interested in reading more of their work. I've typically found Family Matters very easily at used bookstores and at the library. This is a book that I haven't even seen mentioned anywhere, let alone seen on shelves. So when I saw it at a used bookstore, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to pick it up. I also picked up this classic, which is a bind-up of 2 works, which is Wieland, and then the second book is Memoirs of Carwin the Biloquist. And it's both classics are supposed to be about psychological, social, and political concerns of early American Republic, which I feel like is just a very fascinating topic in general. And so, yeah, I'm very curious to read this. Another pick from a little free library was Light in August by William Faulkner. I have not read any William Faulkner, but I want to, and I thought a good way to start was with a free book. I also found an edition of I Never Promised You a Rose Garden by Joanne Greenberg. This is a book that I was very interested in reading after reading Hidden Valley Road. That book talks about a family that has a history of schizophrenia, and one of the books that the author of the book talked about was I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, and it specifically talked about how this story kind of made Americans in general a bit more aware of the topic of schizophrenia, and also gave them a very particular perspective on what that may or may not look like in people. And it also talked about the institutionalization of people with mental health, particularly women. In Valley Road talked about this book and just had a lot of really interesting insights to say about the impact of this book, whether correct or not, on the way Americans think about mental health, especially up to maybe the last 5 years. So I'm really interested to see how many of my assumptions up until the last 5 to 10 years really are reflected in this novel. I also found a copy of Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year. I really find Daniel Defoe's writing interesting, given that he kind of sort of started with travel narratives and then branched out a bit from there. This book was written 60 years after the major plague that hit London, and Daniel Defoe, from my understanding, kind of goes back through with a fictional narrator and kind of really follows what happened and the effects of that pandemic. And my understanding is that to date, this is one of the best historical records they have about that plague. And reading this, I'm partially intrigued because if I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure that's the plague that hits in Forever Amber, which I read earlier this year, which ironically was a very okay book. But the number of other books that it's made me want to read or that I've made connections with since reading it is really hilarious. I also bought this copy of Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is a collection of stories, kind of sort of. The main story in here is Herland, but this particular book also has a few other stories, including The Yellow Wallpaper, which I feel like is the work that she's more well known for. However, it was Herland that I had heard of in another book that I have somewhere that I'll point out at some point. And it talked about just how influential this book was in terms of getting women to rethink their place in society in the US. And so I'm really fascinated by it. And yeah, hopefully this will come up soon. I picked up Humphrey Clinker by Tobias Smollett, who is an author whose one of his works I have read, and I can't remember which, but I studied 18th century British lit, so his name came up a ton, and he is an author who, I don't know if I want to read all of his works, but I certainly want to read a little bit more of his works, and he definitely gets into the sort of body and, as it says, brutal life of 18th century Britain, so it'll be very fascinating to see what goes on with Humphrey Clinker. I was happy to find an edition of Hope Leslie by Catherine Maria Sedgwick, and this is described as set in 17th century New England, portraying early American life and celebrates the role of women in building the Republic. And I think that is something that we do not hear enough about, and so yeah, I'm really fascinated to see what this book is all about. And I lived in Massachusetts for a while, so it'll hopefully be a little bit of a trip down memory lane. Going on with my slowly building Turgenev collection, I bought Home of the Gentry. It's really hard to see the title on this copy. I have heard nothing about this book online, but it's about the homecoming of hero Lavretsky, who returns to his estate, broken by a failed marriage, only to find love again and at once lose it. So, yeah, curious to see how that happens. Finally, a book that I have heard something about, but recall virtually nothing, is How to Live Safely in a Science Fiction Universe. And I'm pretty sure I heard about this from Alex at Frank Fiction. I think she mentioned it on her channel at one point. And I don't know a lot about what this book is about, other than that it has something to do with time machines and or time travel. Like, I think the protagonist's dad invented time travel and has kind of gotten lost in it, and this guy is trying to go and find his dad somehow / save the world, kind of giving me Wrinkle in Time vibes. I'm really interested to see how I end up liking this. Love the title, love that there's a dog on the cover who's hopefully traveling and doing stuff with him, and we will see how it goes. I was able to get a hold of a single volume edition of Golden Lotus, which is described as a saga of ambition, murder, and lust in medieval China. So this is a Chinese classic. It sounds very fascinating to me, all the descriptions that I read. There is another name for this that I always forget, so I will put that up on the screen for you. I did find earlier this summer, and you may or may not have seen that, a single the first volume of a 2-volume edition of this book, and then I realized that it was actually published as a single volume, which I sometimes prefer because otherwise I'm tempted to put down the second part of the story and never pick it up again. So yeah, here it is. I think the cover is beautiful, and yeah, looking forward to reading this. It's also a banned book, so that's fun. I found another book that has been on my TBR for a while and finally found an edition of it, and that is Dom Casmurro. And this is, if I recall, a Brazilian classic and is compared to, on the back, to The Scarlet Letter, Anna Karenina, and Madame Bovary in terms of the themes it explores. So sign me up, please. Thanks to another booktube channel, The Active Mind, I did pick up the 2-volume edition of The Demons, which I had not heard of until he did a book haul and introduced us to it, so thank you. And this book, in brief, is an Austrian novel that is described as a sweeping portrayal of Viennese society on the cusp of catastrophic and irrevocable change. And this is probably... Von Doderer is probably, I guess, the best known Austrian author in terms of their classic works. I actually have by him the Strudhof Steps, I believe it is called, and all of his books sound really fascinating, and he likes to write a really long book, so I don't mind that. And because at some point I apparently lost my mind, one of my books, who knows if we'll find out which one before this is done, mentioned I Ching, and I have no idea what that is, other than that it mentions that everybody in this dystopian book is doing I Ching. And I was like, what even is that? Well, found a book to explain it to me. And it is, I don't want to say equivalent, but it has a similar feel to tarot cards. So, but different purpose, different background, different ways. It's not using cards, so lots of differences, but that's the closest connection that I could make to it. And I'm really fascinated. So I'm really trying to get more into Chinese literature and understanding some aspects of ancient Chinese culture because of that. And this is certainly one of those aspects. It gets mentioned a lot. I Ching and aspects of it get mentioned a lot in some of the Chinese and even Japanese literature that I read, like in the classic literatures, because the people in those books are actually practicing this. And they are flipping the coins or pulling the sticks. However, because it was so common in those books, it's not explained. And in the notes, it may or may not be referenced that they're, having their oracle read, if you will, but it says nothing about it beyond that. So this is my super deep dive into understanding that more. Am I going overboard? Yeah, probably. I also picked up Q by Luther Blissett. This is a story that happens, I believe, after the Reformation, yes, and involves an Anabaptist and his adversary who is a papal informer, and apparently they're basically playing a mental chess game, kind of following each other around. It's not clear if one is trying to destroy the other, and it takes them around the world and through different cities and this and that as they play games with one another. And yeah, so it's supposed to be very thrilling, extremely adventurous, hard to put down despite its length. I bought it at a book sale. The bookstore that I bought it at tends to have a lot of recommendations from the different people who work at the bookstore, and it's one of the few bookstores that I've gone to. It's an independent bookstore where everything they have on their shelf in the fiction section, which is basically just part of one bookcase, but everything on those 4 or 5 shelves I want to own. It's just so well curated and so fascinating, all the books that they have. This was one of them, and when I read the person's description as to why they like it and to what it was about, I just had to own it. So that's one bag down. Yeah, I'll probably stop it here and keep going in another video. So you may be seeing book hauls every week for the next little bit. And if you don't like that, well, just skip them. But if you like a good book haul and like to be introduced to other books, I'm sorry this one I didn't go into too much detail, but now that I'm realizing it's going to take me a couple of videos to do this, I will try and be a little bit more detailed in the upcoming ones. All of these are good though. I've tried to at least mention the genre for them, so if you have a particular genre that you like, that maybe you can look up the description on Storygraph or Goodreads or Wikipedia or somewhere and find out a little bit more about the book. Let me know if you have read any of these books and you would recommend any of them, particularly if you watch my channel regularly and have a good sense of what type of books I like to read. Let me know if there's anything that you think I should get to sooner than later, and I always write recommendations down and I do try and pull from them regularly. And that's it for today, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!